And this is where we can get into kind of the nitty-gritty of plate fidelity. So if we hook back up our nodes here, our node tree here, so let's find a frame. Let's go to our sharpest frame. So you can see here, this is a good example. So you can see here that our patch is actually quite a bit softer than the original plate. So why is that? So we have motion blur turned off. There's no warping occurring. We're on our reference frame. So we haven't actually done anything to this area, and yet there's a noticeable softening happening. And this is a result of something called filtering. So what is filtering? As I said earlier, filtering is a really important concept to understand if you're going to work inside Nuke. And filtering is something that occurs when we're ever transforming an image subpixely in Nuke. Easy to explain with the checkerboard. Get our transform node here. Let's say we transform in X by a full pixel. So as you can see, nothing much is happening. Nuke's basically just shifting those pixels over by 1 pixel. The image quality isn't changing at all. So we say here that no filtering is occurring. But let's say we transform it subpixely by, say, 0.5 in X. So there you can see we're seeing something different. So whenever you transform subpixely in Nuke, Nuke basically has to figure out how it's going to redistribute the values of the pixels. And the effect feels much more soft and like it's just been degraded in quality. The good news is that we actually have some control over how Nuke is going to determine how to assign pixel values in order to reduce the apparent effect of softening. And we can do that by altering our filtering method here. The default method of all transform nodes in Nuke is cubic, and this is basically applying a slight smoothing of values, which you can see has a slight softening effect. So let's see what the other methods do. So impulse will actually do away with filtering and will basically round up our pixel transformation to the nearest integer. So it's on 0. As we move up, once it hits 0.5, it'll just fully move 1 pixel over. This might seem like a solution to the filtering problem. You know, it guarantees that there's not going to be any filtering taking place, no softening, but it's actually not a very desirable thing because we want our image to move smoothly around in the frame. We don't want it to be jumping around by full pixel increments. You would see it sort of jittering and shifting against the plate, especially if the motion is quite subtle. And that's why filtering is a necessary thing. So impulse, not a filtering method I use very often. I would stay away from that one. So the next three, Keys, Simon, and Riffman, are all going to apply a sharpening effect to the image. So if I flick between cubic and Keys, what Keys is doing is actually creating more contrast in the surrounding pixels, which has the effect of visually sharpening the image. So if we're starting at cubic, there's Keys, there's Simon, there's Riffman. You can see that they're basically doing the same thing, just to a greater degree. So the next three, Mitchell, Parson, and Notch, are all softening filters. So let's have a look at those. So you can see Mitchell is actually giving us an apparent sort of sharpening of the image here with that increase in contrast we were seeing from the sharpening filters. But you can also see over here that it's applying a sort of slight blur on the image that cubic wasn't doing. So while this is arguably applying sort of a sharpen, it's most definitely considered a softening filter, just because it is applying the slight blur. As we look at Parson, you can see it's just ramping up the softening, and then Notch going to the extreme and just softening the hell out of it. And then the final three, Lanxos 4, Lanxos 6, and Sync 4, all sharpening methods, with Sync 4 just being the notch of sharpening, And if we compare the most extreme sharpening filter to the most extreme sort of softening filter, I just wanted to illustrate the effect to which we can harm the image just with a small, sort of transformation in X. So it's really important to understand that this filtering occurs every time we transform subpixely, and some people call this a filter kick. So if we've done one transform, there's been one filtering of the image taking place, so that's one filter kick. And then you can have 2, 3, 4, 5, however many filter kicks, and each kick is gonna degrade the image. So it's something you always want to be trying to limit, is how often Nuke is doing this. And one way that Nuke limits the number of filter kicks that are happening is something called concatenation. And concatenation, once again, you absolutely have to have an understanding of what concatenation is, otherwise you can really do some unnecessary damage to the plate. So if we have a series of transform nodes, and I'm just going to go through and just assign these some random sort of basic transformations. So we have a series of transform nodes, all doing something different, either transforming or rotating the image. If we were filtering the image at each transform node, by the end of the series of nodes we would have an image that is very soft. Fortunately, Nuke's smarter than that, and what's actually going to do is it's going to look at all these transform nodes and calculate the sum of the changes and total them, and then apply a single transformation and a single filtering of the image. So it said that these nodes are concatenating together, so they're sort of in an unbroken chain. And it's a really important thing, because often we will have a long sort of chain of transform nodes, like tracker nodes and transforms and corner pins, and we don't want that filtering to happen at every stage, and so we always want to try and preserve the unbroken chain of concatenation. And if we're not careful, we can break the concatenation of these nodes by breaking the chain with nodes that don't concatenate. And I'll talk about which nodes do and don't concatenate in a second, but for now I'll just duplicate these nodes and I'll just put a grade node between each of these transform nodes, because the grade node is a node that will break concatenation. So if we see our first example, nodes are concatenating, we're taking one filter kick here. Let's compare that with our second example here, where we've broken concatenation at every step, and as you can see, we're taking 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 filter kicks, and we're basically just nuking the image. We've basically gone from sort of an acceptable level of damage to the plate to just totally unacceptable, just destroying of all the detail. So it's really important to understand the concept of concatenation so that you can structure your scripts in a way that group transform nodes together to reduce the number of filter kicks your image is taking. And just always have it in the back of your mind that transforming an image is going to degrade it. By the way, when it comes to concatenated transformation nodes, Nuke will only pay attention to the final filtering method. So it'll just ignore, so if I have this set to sync 4, it's going to ignore the filtering methods on all of these and just apply one filter, basically summed all of these values, and it's going to apply the sync 4 filter. So common nodes that do concatenate together: transforms, trackers, corner pins, reformats. Nodes that won't break concatenation, frame holds, dots, of course, switch nodes. Dissolve nodes will break concatenation. Then there are nodes like the Gridwarp node, and this node will actually concatenate, but only upstream. So if you put it at the end, it's going to concatenate with all those nodes. But if you say put it, in the middle of a group of transform nodes, it will actually break concatenation. But those are the nodes that do concatenate. You can go online and find lists of nodes that do and don't concatenate, but just remember to try to group your transform nodes together wherever possible. And if it's possible, to put your Gridwarp nodes at the end of your transform nodes. For me, that's a harder one, because you're normally putting a Gridwarp on a sort of a static patch, which is then being match moved, so that filter kick is always going to take place. But yeah, so let's have a look over here and let's see how many filter kicks we're actually taking here. So starting at the top here, we have a tracker node and a corner pin node, both applying a separate transformation, but these nodes do concatenate, so just one filtering occurring there. Frame holds do concatenate. Paint nodes don't, so we've broken concatenation already. Moving down, grid warp, we're on our reference frame here, but if we move to frame 17, a warping is taking place, so another filtering is occurring here. Dissolve nodes, as we said, do break concatenation, so that's already 2 filter kicks. And then we have our corner pin and our tracker, once again, do concatenate together, so that's 3 filter kicks, and then no more transform. So that's 3 filterings of our image through our little setup right here. So I'm not sure there's a way to reduce the amount of filtering that's occurring here by doing this setup, which we wanted to do. This is a kind of an unavoidable amount of filtering, but you know, it's a manageable amount. Because even though you can see that, you know, even on our reference frame we are filtering the image, but you know, with our filtering all set to cubic at the moment, we're going to go through and change those. We also potentially may be doing some sharpening on top of that in addition to it to try and eliminate the appearance of softening that's occurring here. So the question is, what filtering methods do we want to use? Well, of course, there's no one answer to that. It always depends on how much softening is occurring and what are the sort of the characteristics of the plate and so forth. I'm a big advocate of Lanczos 4. It is normally sort of my go-to filter that I change all of my, you know, my transforms to. I find it does a really good job of restoring whatever sort of crunchiness is lost in the plate. And it's very rare, I find, that it ever results in any significant sharpening artifact. Sometimes I find that I want something even stronger than a Lanczos 4, maybe a Lanczos 6. Very seldomly Sync 4. You know, maybe I've started with a really soft frame that I'm painting up. You know, I'm really trying to make up for that. If I ever use Sync 4, I basically have the expectation that it's going to cause some sharpening artifacts in the image. And if we want to see what that's going to do to this image, change it to Sync 4. And if you're ever trying to assess what kind of sharpening artifacts are happening, you really want to go to sort of high contrast areas first and foremost. So if we start transforming this in Y. So here you can see what it's doing. And those are some of your sort of classic sharpening artifacts, those dark sort of edges you're getting there. But there's a couple of ways that we can still use our Sync 4 filter and then reduce or even remove these sharpening artifacts we have here. One way we can do that is if we duplicate our transform, and if we use, say, a less effect, or let's even just go to cubic, so we know that really there's no, well actually no, let's go to something like Lanczos 4. So what we can do is actually key mix in this result, but only in the areas where we would expect to get sharpening artifacts. So we can actually use an edge detect node. And we can use this to, if we set it to simple, and then we sort of mess with the threshold here, what it's going to give us is actually a matte for the most high contrast areas of the plate, which is basically what this node is doing. It's basically looking for high contrast and then basically giving you an alpha in those areas. So we can actually use this matte here as our mask input on a key mix node. So if we look at that, so our key mix node is basically mixing in this transformation, but only where our alpha is here, and this is the result that we get. You know, and we can of course modify our matte as well. You know, we can erode it out and blur it a bit. You can always adjust the threshold more until we have a matte that looks more or less what we want. And the effect of that is we get to still retain all of the additional sharpening that this Sync 4 filter is doing, but none of the really harsh artifacting that we were getting before. So this is one way of doing it. I would not say it's my sort of preferred method. One pretty simple and effective way of dealing with sharpening artifact is to actually put the image in log first before you do any transforms. So if we pull up our color space node, and if we put it in log, say slog, and then let's grab our, so there's our transform, and then this node, let's just reverse those inputs, so we're taking it out of log here. And you can see that, so we're getting all of the kind of the sharpening qualities with none of the artifacts. So let's apply some of these ideas to our paintwork over here. So if we go back down, we're on frame 18, if we go back down, let's change this back to cubic. So this is where we started. You can see we're getting this noticeable softening. So let's go ahead and change all of our filtering on our transform nodes to Lanczos 4. and we know there's no warping happening on this frame, so that's not actually going to affect anything, but it will obviously affect it on other frames. Cool, and you've noticed that I haven't really bothered changing it on the tracker node there or the corner pin node at the bottom, just because I know concatenation is taking place, so it's ignoring that cubic filter anyway. So let's go back down and have a look and see what effect that's had. So already that's looking tons better, but there's still definitely some filtering taking place. I feel like softening there, so let's just try and crank that up to Lanxos 6. Let's see how that goes. So yeah, I think that's looking a lot better. Lanxos 6 is quite a strong sharpen, and I don't actually use it that often, but I think just the nature of this plate is quite soft. I mean, the reason I wouldn't use a Lanxos 6 is just because of those sharpening artifacts that we talked about. You know, a lot of the time if I've set all my transforms to Lanxos 4 and it's still lacking that little bit of crunch that is existing in the plate, then a lot of the time I'll just put a little sharpen on the patch at the end. So let's pull up a sharpen, and then of course the default is way too high. Maybe just start inching it up from 1. So yeah, I think with the Lanxos 6 and then with the sharpen on top of it, I think we're getting now into the realm of this is feeling like a little bit sharper than the plate. Maybe let's just turn this down back to Lanxos 4 and we'll see. So yeah, maybe that's just a touch sharper, but I don't think anyone's going to be worried about that. Actually, it's looking pretty good. And then, like I said, I don't think we're really going to be getting any sharpening artifacts here, but just to demonstrate the workflow of putting it in and out of log. So if we pull up an OCIO color space, put it into log. If we copy that down here, and then we need to take it out of log after the final transformation, which is happening here at the tracker node. And because this color space node is essentially grading the image, we always want to do that on the unpremultiplied patch. And then reverse these inputs. And that would be how that workflow would work. So if we were incurring any sharpening artifacts, that is a very effective way of eliminating those issues while retaining all of the other qualities of the sharpen that we want. Cool, so I'll just quickly pre-comp out our patch again here because my computer hates this when I turn motion blur on these nodes. So I'll just quickly pre-comp it out and then we'll have a look at the final result. So having pre-comp that and looking at the result now, pretty happy with it. All those patches are blending together and dissolving together like really seamlessly. Not getting any, you're not noticing those dissolves between the patches. That's the key thing. That's a result of sort of the efforts we went to ensuring that all those patches were just lining up really well when they were dissolving between each other. Cool, well that's kind of everything I wanted to cover. I hope there was some valuable stuff in there for you guys. Do try these workflows out for yourself. The stabilizing grid warping workflow I demonstrated in this tutorial I think is really, really awesome because it gives you such a high degree of accuracy. If you can imagine a more complex version of this shot where instead of a flat surface where we're placing a patch on, you actually have moving, flowing clothing. This workflow is really powerful for tasks like that. When it comes to the plate fidelity stuff, the main thing I wanted people to take away from this is the importance of not losing plate fidelity and to keep things like filtering and concatenation in the back of your mind when you're working. This is really sort of foundational stuff if you want to get into paint and compositing. Like every compositor needs to know this stuff. But fortunately it's pretty easy to grasp, I think. I think what's important is just sort of having the mindset that whenever you're doing paint work, whenever we're transforming the image or manipulating it in any way, we are causing damage to the plate. So it's about knowing when and how it's happening and what the tools are at your disposal to sort of mitigate against it and, if necessary, undo it or kind of counteract it so that at the very least, it's not getting, it's not noticeable, it's not going to get called out by anyone, and we're sort of, maintaining quality that was inherent in the sort of the footage that we started with. But if you understood everything in this tutorial, I think you already have like a good solid basis in that area. For 99% of the shots that you're going to be working on. Just things like check that you're not softening the plate. If you are, check your filtering algorithms. Check that you're not unnecessarily transforming the plate or not unnecessarily breaking concatenation at any point. Assessing whether you need to go beyond just altering the filtering methods, if you need to sharpen it. And then at that point it's about making sure that you're not over sharpening it, and if you're sharpening it, you're not creating any artifacts. And if you are, then you can look at, maybe putting it in log, doing your transformations, then taking it out of log like we did in this shot. Alright, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Please leave me a comment to let me know if it was valuable to you or not. And if you have any suggestions on topics or things that you want me to cover in future tutorials, let me know and I'll consider that. And yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.